Over the last several decades, corporate profits have soared to record highs, and workers' share of the national income has moved to record lows. Federalist writes, quote, "Corporations push wokeness to move the conversation away from economic privilege and the collapse of working-class Americans."
Friend of the show and journalist Zaid Jilani joins us now to discuss how that wokeness seems to be moving the money from labor into the hands of corporations. Hey there, Zaid.
Great to see you, Zaid.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So, Zaid, one of the things I think Will does a really good job of in that article is laying out the case, right, for corporations' move to wokeness is actually shading the truth of how bad they are on outsourcing jobs, on, enriching very high elite levels, and really not caring about economic populism. And so do you think that's an accurate assessment of the situation?
Yeah, I mean, something we have to remember is that whatever these firms do, they're deciding that it's in the best interest of their shareholders, who they're legally responsible to. So, a corporation can't really take an ideological or moral position. They take a position that they think is good for their bottom line, right? So I think in this case, they've seen a group of intense consumers. I think over the past few years, there's been a growing kind of portion of liberal consumers, tend to be upper income, highly educated, who view their spending behavior as a function of their politics. So I think that if they portray themselves as being, for instance, gay friendly, supportive of Black Lives Matter, supportive of some feminist causes, then I think they see that as a means of growing their business by appealing to those consumers. But appealing to consumers is not the same thing necessarily as actually taking steps that would improve the status of the groups that they're discussing, or improve the status of their workforce, or even cheaper products and better products for consumers. So I think that a lot of this has turned into a branding exercise for corporations. If they can brand themselves as appealing to a certain social group, then they can use that to kind of ride the bottom line. But that's very, very different than actually restructuring the companies with themselves to change their behavior in a way that would maybe improve society.
Yeah, and look, I mean, if corporations, if they find it to be in their best, corporate self-interest to embrace the words Black Lives Matter and to even embrace some, diversity within their ranks, if that motivates them to do the right thing, I'm all for it. But you look at an example, to me, Amazon is like a perfect example here, right? You go to Amazon, it says Black Lives Matter on the top of it, and they've done other things to sort of signal that they're with the movement. Meanwhile, they're firing Christian Smalls, who's a Black organizer, at one of their warehouses. The way they treat their working class workers at that corporation is absolutely abhorrent, as documented multiple times by journalists. They have no interest in changing any of those actual conditions that directly impact disproportionately Black and brown working class people.
Yeah, it was interesting because Jeff Bezos published an email. I don't know if it was sent to him or sent to Amazon more generally, where some random person said, well, I don't like this slogan. I prefer all lives matter, which is a common conservative kind of retort. Bezos published this email publicly. He said, no, this is not what we're about. We're about Black Lives Matter. And if you think about it, all he's really doing is branding himself a certain way versus a branding that some random person out in the population wanted them to have. And he's promoting that and boasting about that. Well, he's, the richest person in the United States right now. He runs a company that has a monopoly over so many industries, kind of squeezes them for profit, prevents a lot of people from starting businesses, from developing their own kind of wealth that they can pass on intergenerationally. He is in many ways directly responsible for the status of many people on the lower rungs of society.
True.
But if he promotes a certain slogan or brand, it's a way for him to redirect from that fact to saying, no, actually, I'm with you because, I have the same fashionable words that I'm speaking at this moment. I'm even willing to rebuke this random person who has a different set of words they'd like me to say. But it just doesn't say much or do much for the status of Americans at the bottom, because at the end of the day, like, the reason why there is so much inequality in America is largely because people don't have access to capital or opportunity. And Amazon is basically, they, in some ways you could say they expand opportunity. They give us slightly cheaper products and slightly faster. They're able to operate during the pandemic when a lot of businesses weren't. But they're also consolidating that market power, right? They're consolidating wealth up to people like Bezos. And that ultimately prevents more the diversification of wealth, prevents the diversification of power really in America, because America runs on money. So.
Zaid, I'm wondering if you can take a stab at how the right should respond to this, because what's been interesting for me to watch is that, Republicans for a very long time have taken this approach that, corporate power is virtuous and we should just leave it alone. But increasingly, I think there are people on the right that are recognizing, in instances like this, mega corporations are just anathema to conservative viewpoints in many ways. And this came up in the big tech hearing last week when Republicans brought up the fact that Amazon in particular won't let them donate to certain conservative causes through their Amazon Smile program. So I'm just curious about your observations of this. Do you see a shift in how the right is approaching corporate power as corporations move toward this sort of woke virtue signaling?
Well, I think in the grassroots, a lot of people on the right are recognizing that businesses want to kind of pander to kind of higher income, high education, liberal spenders, primarily like we're talking about like people with postgraduate degrees, people who are in the upper classes of society who feel good buying these products, who feel good when they contributed to gay rights or civil rights or feminism by buying certain products. And I think they're seeing that happen. Whether this actually changes the policies on the conservative side, I think we've actually seen very little substantive pushback among elected officials on the right. And primarily that's because they've wedded themselves to corporate power as a function of the economy. They think that business, has an inherent right to promote its vision or its virtues throughout society. And I think because so many of those virtues are now seen as socially liberal, a lot of conservatives are souring on that. But it's difficult to talk about that at the same time while allowing someone like Jeff Bezos to develop unlimited market power and capital. Because as long as you allow him to develop that, of course he's going to be able to promote any number of liberal causes, at least superficially, to pursue consumers, because he has the power to do that. If you prevented him from having the power to do that, which is something I think Tucker Carlson was moving towards and Sean Hannity was quite horrified by, but if you prevented him from having the power to do that, then it wouldn't be the matter of a few individuals and corporations trying to set the social agenda of America. It'd be more democratized, right? The average citizen would have more of a say in it. But that goes against so much of conservative kind of dogma over the past 30 or 40 years, to where I think conservatives will be forced to think about whether they want to be outsourcing the power and morality of society to a few corporate actors who can just decide one day to flip a switch and decide to promote any message they want. We see this also with campaign finance spending. Typically, conservative electeds have said it's free speech for a billionaire to spend as much money as they want in an election, right? If that's free speech, then the billionaire is going to own the agenda of America, right? That's because they have the most speech, because they have the most dollars. So I think this moment is going to have to force conservatives to rethink a lot of these things. They're going to have to come to the realization that sometimes what they believe in personally is undermined by the very firms they've spent the last 40 years empowering. And they have to choose between sometimes that market fundamentalism and also just understanding that allowing a few people on the coasts who are extremely rich to set the agenda of America isn't very democratic.
Yeah, that's so interesting. We really saw that kind of play out in real time in the antitrust big tech hearings last week, where you got this memo from Jim Jordan that was like, we're worried about these narrow instances of conservative bias, and we want to keep our critique here because we don't want to punish success, right? They didn't want to go against the sort of bedrock idea of market fundamentalism on which conservative thinking and politics has been based now for 40 years. So there seems like there's a real struggle playing out there. Interesting to me, though, that there's less, I guess that corporate ideology is so well funded, and is that why you end up with so few leaders who represent what is a very widespread view held within the public?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Morning Consult, which is a polling firm, has done polling about these corporations coming out and doing the Black Lives Matter messaging, and something like, I think, 14% of white adults and 19% of black adults think that the companies actually care about these causes. They're very cynical about it, actually. The public understands that the companies are kind of doing this as a branding exercise. But it's also when government's kind of left the playing field on so much of this, and companies are the ones promoting themselves as moral leaders, I think a lot of people think, well, what else can there be? And that's the unfortunate reality of letting the Jeff Bezos of the world kind of control so much social and political power is that they're the person you have to run to. I think a lot of nonprofits are running to corporations for funding for this reason because they have all the money, right? Like they're the only way forward. And I think a lot of politicians, they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. And unfortunately, what happens then is you have people who are not elected by anybody, who are not accountable to anybody. I can't defeat Jeff Bezos in an election, or the Waltons in an election, or Bill Gates. These people are the ones making these big decisions overall society. And if conservatives feel like a lot of these decisions are being made in an opposite direction from them, then they have to rethink the policy framework that they support that allowed what should be public decisions and public debate to be controlled by a handful of really rich people who are just promoting an agenda without any election, without any kind of real democratic discussion. It's just what they happen to think will please their shareholders and attract liberal customers. So
I think that is so interesting, so well said.
Yeah.
Zaid, it's always great to see you.
you.
Next on Rising, economics professor Pavlina Chernova reacts to a sign of the times financial video with tips to make ends meet since CARES money has dried up. That's when Rising continues.